So I thought today that I might talk about kind of the role, or at least start talking about the role that music has had in my life. I'm a musician. I write music, I play music. I do it for a very large portion of my job at my church, worship leader there, music director. And I love music, like a lot. And part of this too is just kind of like thinking about what the role music has been in my life. But let's just start back at the beginning. The very first thing that I can remember doing musically is sitting next to my brother, watching him play Nintendo games, and me humming along and learning the songs. And I remember my mom having to say no singing at the table, because I would just hum the Tetris theme or the Bubble Bobble theme or the Mario theme like the entire time at the table. In order for them to not all go insane, that was kind of the rule that was established. And so that's kind of the very first thing I remember with music, but also being at church growing up. My mom has a beautiful voice, and I remember hearing her sing in church and just kind of like watching her, engaging in worship, and the worship band up at the front was so fun. It was this loud, boisterous, a lot of like call and response type stuff. And our Pastor Charlie at the time he was a great musician, like great piano player, singer, guitarist. And I just sort of had this fascination with who these people were and how they learned how to make those weird blocks of string and wood make noises that sounded cool. And I remember back in those days, like they had the colored microphone toppers, like a red one and a yellow one, and they smelled really weird. I remember being a kid and like going up and like playing with them a little bit and like smelling them and being like, oh, they smell goofy, because they were just months and months and months of caked on gross human spit. And like it just now I think about it, it's like that's got to be one of the most nasty it's like the equivalent of a sponge but for microphones. But anyway, that didn't turn me off from music. I still wanted to learn more about it. My parents had a upright piano. I think they had it when I was born, because I don't ever remember not having it. Actually, one of the really sad days of my life is when that piano got destroyed in a freak accident. I'll talk more about that some other day probably, but anyway, just that Kimball piano. And I remember plinking out different things. I remember one day figuring out how to play That's My Lucky Charms, They're Magically Delicious on the piano, and I was so proud of myself that I'd figured this thing out. But it was cool. My dad plays guitar and banjo and mandolin and bass and violin and just a whole slew of instruments. He plays piano too, and he sings. He doesn't like to admit it, but he does sing, and he does have a good voice. But just the always being around musical parents. My mom plays the piano too. She reads the sheet music and stuff, and I think she probably wants to play more than she gets the opportunity to. But anyway, just growing up with that, was always sort of like a fascination. Now the weird thing is that my older brother and my younger sister, or not the youngest sister, but I have two sisters. Anyway, the one who is directly younger than me weren't musical really at all. Like my older brother played in the school band, and I think my younger sister did too, but I didn't. And that's because when I was 8 years old, I joined a choir, a boys' choir, a local boys' choir called the Land of Lakes Boys' Choir. And that experience, I think, was really solidified for me that I had musical talent, and I had musical drive, and I had the ability to learn new things with music. My mom had begun to teach me piano lessons when I was 5 years old, on our Kimball piano. And if you learned piano, anybody out there use the Nuna Basics pink book kind of as a starter? I know it's a pretty popular thing. That was my first piano book. But anyway, joined this choir, learned a ton from some really, really great directors and great mentors through that program, and I got to travel and sing and do we did some competition stuff. I don't remember it being very competition-y when I was in the choir. I think it was more like friendly competition sort of stuff. Like we'd have like these choir jamborees or whatever in like different states. We'd go on tour every summer. So with the choir, I got to travel to Canada, like up by Calgary. Got to travel to Oregon. Went down to Florida one year. Went to New York to perform at Carnegie Hall one year. Traveled to Europe twice. And I got to do some really, really cool things as a result of all that. And I'll probably talk more about this later on in more videos, because there's so many stories that are fun to remember and fun to reminisce about, and maybe it'll be fun for you guys to learn about. But anyway, the whole time I had these strange fascinations with music that not a lot of other kids my age had. Everybody was listening to like popular music, and I listened to big band music. I had a few cassette tapes of big band music. I loved String of Pearls. I don't know why I loved big band music so much, but I really did. And then I loved classical music. Later on I had gotten some CDs, like Mozart's Greatest Hits, but I had a Nutcracker Suite on cassette tape that I listened to over and over and over again, and it's a wonder I didn't wear that thing out. But I remember being in choir, and all the other kids were listening to like Rage Against the Machine, and which I love them now. But I was just like, I don't understand. Like, I just don't get it. I don't get that kind of music. Like, my brother listened to more rock type stuff like Bush and a myriad of Christian artists and stuff. But me, I had those like classical music stuff. I'd listen to our classical music station here in Minnesota. Listen to that a lot. I would record actually whole broadcasts and re-listen to the pieces of music that were played on there and stuff. And it was a fascination for me, because I really wanted to learn how to play some of this stuff and how to sing some of this stuff. But I also just really enjoyed listening to it. It's so calming to listen to classical music. And I think that calm, that peace, that that music brought for me was a big reason why I just continued to do it, because things would get stressful in life, or things would get boring or tedious, or I'd feel angry or whatever. It seemed like the music always just calmed me down and kind of re-centered me onto the identity that I was starting to gain as a person. Like, this is who I am. I'm a music person. But it was weird. I was in this choir for several years, and I never considered myself a musician. I played piano, and I would never have said I'm a musician. And I don't know why that was the case. Maybe it was because I hadn't been doing it long enough, or I don't know. I saw people who were musicians tended to, I don't know a lot more songs, but that's not true. I knew tons of pieces of music. Sang solos in different languages like German, Italian, Latin. We had one in Swahili. That was interesting. But English, that counts. I'm saying some Japanese. Wow. Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I got a lot of really interesting experiences from being in that choir, but probably the most poignant moment for me, and I'll probably do is I'll continue this into a part 2, because there's a lot more. music story to tell, and this video is going to be coming to a close soon. But probably the most poignant moment for me was, I think it was 12 or 13 years old, and I went to a youth conference with my youth group. And we arrived at the building and played some basketball or some kind of outside sportish thing, and then we went in for the actual service, and there was a band there called Bluer, and I don't think they really went anywhere. They made maybe 1 or 2 recordings, and it wasn't like I was completely like fanboying on this band, but they were a worship band, and I just remember thinking, I need to do this. Like, this has to be what I do with my life, is to lead people in worship and to explore what it means to be a worship musician. And so it's hard to explain. Like, if you follow the whole belief in God thing like I do, like, I think it was definitely a God moment where he was speaking to me, and it wasn't just me saying I want to do this. It was kind of, that's when a calling was placed on my life that I was going to be a worship leader. And I remember a couple of the songs. One was called Invitación Fountain. And like, when I listen back to that song now, I'm kind of like, man, it's an okay song. But it was just the way that the team worked together, and the way that just the atmosphere was created for people to talk to God and to think about God and to process who God is and all that stuff. I was just completely addicted at that point. I was like, I need to not just engage in these kind of atmospheres. I want to create these atmospheres for people to actually be with God and to hang out with God. And so up until that point, music had been a hobby, music had been a fascination, music had been something that I really enjoyed and was just really fun. And even though it was a lot of work, just the complete fascination that it held me with, like, that gripped me, made all that work not feel like work. And so, yeah, I guess there's a lot more to the story because I'm 30 years old, and that's about half of it, with a lot of stuff left out in the middle. But yeah, I'll go into the second half and kind of where I've gone from there, coming up in a few days probably. But that's all I got for today. What role has music played in your life up to this point? Has it been a background track, basically, or has it been more prominent for you? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. Peace.